afternoon. Hi, Agni. How are you? The one I didn't say hi to. We actually haven't met before, so we met over a Zoom call. So it's always nice to introduce yourself to people. I think when you're about to ask them really hard questions that they're unprepared for. Um, so the topic of the panel today is a really interesting one: energy infrastructure and a sustainable energy future. As everybody in this room undoubtedly knows, Colorado, but also the nation, is in the midst, to different degrees, transitioning energy infrastructure from just traditional fossil fuels to adding more renewables, and in many cases, like Colorado, moving towards the current goal of 100% renewable. There's, of course, a 2040 goal in Colorado to move utilities to 100% renewable energy. And then there's a 2050 goal to move economy-wide to a 96% zero emission goal. But to the extent that you're moving utilities to 100% renewable and you're electrifying, that's what everything else is going to be. That's the energy that everybody else is going to get. It's a really bold goal, and it is one that has been tested time and again, and the voters and the people of Colorado have decided that's the direction they want to move. But it's also happening, similar transitions are happening across the West, which is why it's really great to have today's panel here, because we've got some really good experts on what is happening, not just in Colorado, but also in the West. And I want to say I'm really excited. I have a bunch of questions for them, and I hope that they're all the panelists are prepared to discuss in detail. The exciting part of the panel is it's just not a government panel. We have the Governor's Energy Office here, but we also have, from a broader perspective, WAPA, the Western Area Power Administration, and we also have a municipal utility. That is the one who is being asked to implement much of what the policymakers are putting forward. So with that, I am going to turn and ask the panelists to introduce themselves, where they're from, and what agents, where they work, and also to discuss, their role in this energy transition, whether it be in Colorado or not. And why don't we start and just move down the line?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here this late in the evening. My name is Eric Lowe. I'm with the Colorado Energy Office. I'm on our local government team of 2, and essentially I'm an expert in federal and state funding opportunities for local governments, and I travel all around the state, engaging with our local governments and networking with them and supporting them in their energy goals and project needs.
Good afternoon. My name is John Messner. I'm a commissioner with the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. Previous to July 1st, it was the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Previous to this, I was a Gunnison County Commissioner, and the role of the ECMC is to regulate energy sources in a way that is protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources.
So now we've got to learn ECMC instead of COGC.
It's been entertaining. 71 years it was COGCC, and so
it's
now
take some time.
It's going to take a little time.
That.
Yeah.
Paul.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. Paul Schwab with WAPA, Western Area Power Administration, and my role there is I manage a loan fund, a $3 billion loan fund to build and upgrade our transmission system. That was actually, fun facts, signed right here in Denver, Colorado at the Museum of Nature and Science, and way back in 2009 as part of the Recovery Act. So I'm privileged to have the opportunity to speak to you today and talk about this program.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Berry, also with the Colorado Energy Office. I am working on our building decarbonization team, and with a particular focus on reducing and hopefully eliminating emissions from new construction, in particular in Colorado.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's quite late. I'm Agnieszka Hernandez. I am project manager for Energy Resource Planning Group within Colorado Springs Utilities. Essentially, what we are doing, we are modeling the best, I should say, portfolios of scenarios involving selection of best resources for the future that would meet our needs. We're doing it by establishing integrated resource plans, so we update those plans, and then I am also typically involved in acquisition of these resources. And I know there's been a couple colleagues from Colorado Springs Utilities, but I thought I will mention that Colorado Springs Utilities is locally owned utility. We have 4 services. We serve energy, gas, water, and wastewater, and we are governed by the local board. Thank you.
Thank you. So in order to level set a little bit, I want to start off with a question that I'm going to direct towards maybe Adam, Eric, or John. Is what is so I have a question Colorado specific. Then I'm going to go more broadly. But what is Colorado's energy policy right now? What are we? I talked a little bit about it. What are we driving towards? What's the end goal of current policy?
I'm happy to start with that, certainly. I mean, obviously, the ultimate end goal is an energy system that is reliable, secure, resilient, and also does not contribute to climate change. So I think that, we are pursuing a vast number of different solutions to try to reach those goals between, electric power sector, buildings, transportation, industrial, agriculture, across the entire economy, ultimately to drive towards that goal. So, on a very high level, that is what we are ultimately trying to achieve.
Just to follow up on that, Colorado, in my opinion, has possibly the second strongest climate policy in the country behind California. And we do repeat a lot of the same large buckets of emissions reduction that they do. So for example, renewable energy and energy production, right? Buildings, obviously, and then transportation. But one other unique thing about Colorado is how strongly focused our governor is on sort of what he calls the last 20% of decarbonization, the things that these common technology applications won't solve for example, heavy duty commercial and industrial processes, furnaces, heavy trucking, things of that nature. So we're really zoning in on some technologies to bridge that last gap of decarbonization. Colorado's joined the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub, which is a group of 4 states working on clean hydrogen deployment for commercial and industrial applications. And then we're also looking at some other solutions for those specific commercial industrial applications.
John, do you have anything to add to?
My agency is the one that actually implements the policies that get developed, and so certainly we understand the goals, we appreciate the goals, and finding pragmatic solutions to be able to enable a lot of these goals to happen in real time, in real life, is ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. So
Great. And Paul, you see this from a broader perspective. What do you see happening across the West, or at least in WAPA's footprint, in terms of what is this transition? One, is everybody transitioning? And 2, what does the transition look like where you see it? And for those that aren't transitioning, what do you see happening there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Doug. Well, WAPA is a large federal agency. We represent 15 states in the West, and you can imagine there's quite a range on that spectrum of where they are in terms of addressing climate change and addressing the energy transition. From one of the things that we do have in common is some kind of a long, prolonged drought in the West that we're all experiencing. So there are themes of commonality and kind of having to rethink our energy supply to maybe the last year kind of notwithstanding. So, we really see states all along that spectrum in terms of different approaches, but we are seeing also for drivers that are outside of just climate change, the need for either grid hardening, grid security, making up for loss of hydropower due to aridification. So I would say the driver of some of the changes and transition is, depending on which state you're in, it can vary quite a bit. But we're also seeing some states that you wouldn't even think about, doing some nice things in transmission development, and just for different reasons of doing so.
Great. And I don't want to cut anybody else off. I don't know, Agni, if you have anything you want to add to that, or how you see it from the standpoint of someone who is sort of catching all of the requirements that come down.
Yes, so when it comes to application of sustainability in and utility level, largely we are regulated, so we follow laws, and but we're doing a little bit more than is required. We did publish back in 2020 our integrated resource plan. That plan at that time was gearing towards sustainability, higher sustainability than what was at that time required. So this time around, when we're updating, we actually write with the law, with the regulation. But what I want to say, as a result of implementing and modeling this regulation, what we are looking at today, we just finished our update. We are essentially looking into procuring within the next 7 years about 1,000, let me be clear, 1,500 megawatts of new resources. This is extremely substantial given that we are a utility that peaks in the neighborhood of 1,000. So this is a huge growth from us. We'll be incorporating these renewables. There is part of it, there is some natural gas just to ensure reliability, because as we mentioned, we're looking at sustainability, but also providing reliability as well. We will be doing this in also somewhat a new way. We are about to publish our all source RFP. That is an RFP that is a little bit different. We're not asking for specific resource. We actually wanted to know what's out there that we can incorporate in our portfolio that best fits our existing portfolio. And we're asking for so much because number one, we're growing. I think it's not a secret that Colorado is a beautiful state to live in, and Colorado Springs is no different to that. Another aspect that is important to mention, as part of sustainability plan, we are retiring our units. So I think it was mentioned a couple hours ago, we had retired our Drake units in 2020, and we are looking into retiring also our another coal unit, Nixon. So we have that gap in our portfolio, and we also filling it with new resources because we see growing. Thank you.
Right, thank you. John, we talked a little bit about the transition, you know, your agency has transitioned names, but it's also transitioned responsibilities to a large degree. What does the transition of the former COGCC to the Energy Carbon Management Commission look like? What are the expanded roles and responsibilities, and what does it mean for the previous mission of the COGCC?
Thanks for the question. So, like I indicated, 71 years, the agency had been the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. Senate Bill 181 in 2019 changed the mission of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission from an entity that fostered oil and gas development with consideration of protection of the people and the environment to regulating oil and gas in a way that protects public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. And so that mission shift occurred in 2019, well, it occurred 2019, 2020, and since then we've been regulating under that mission. This last legislative session, we actually got an expanded role through a few different pieces of legislation that were passed that changed our mission from solely regulating oil and gas development in the state of Colorado to regulating not only oil and gas development, but carbon capture and sequestration, deep geothermal, hydrogen, and underground natural gas storage, amongst other things. And so that expanded mission really allows the agency that has a lot of tools around these technologies to be able to develop rules, regulatory structures, and policies to be able to lay the groundwork for these emerging technologies, to create more opportunities for different energy sources and different ways to mitigate some of the emissions associated with current oil and gas and other emitting industries that are occurring throughout the state. Now, what does that mean for our previous mission around oil and gas regulatory protocols? Not much changes. So we still regulate oil and gas in a way that is protective, and we have additional directives from the governor to continue to develop regulations that reduce emissions over the next 10 years. So.
Great, thank you. You know, I talked a little, or I alluded to, I think, the greenhouse gas roadmap, that it's really the guiding document for Colorado with respect to where they're going. It's a very detailed document, and it's an impressive document because unlike, you know, some states that just have a goal, Colorado certainly has goals, but they've also sort of put behind those goals specific actions they're going to take to reach them. So you kind of know what you're going to get and what to expect. So Eric, let me direct this one to you. The state's roadmap outlines strategies for achieving the state's long-term decarbonization goals. You know, you know, we're talking a lot about infrastructure, and that's the topic of this panel. How does this plan interact with infrastructure investment? You know, and what will the effects of Roadmap 2.0, so they have Roadmap 1.0 and they're currently working on Roadmap 2.0. What will the effects be on Roadmap 2.0? And what type of investments or technologies will be needed to achieve the state's goals?
Yeah, this
Okay,
is.
now, and I just want to qualify in all of this that the answers need to be longer than the question.
This is really exciting because what many people don't realize about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is that not only is there a lot of immediate funding available, but there's a lot of follow-up funding coming through. So as an example, with the Greenhouse Gas Roadmap, the state of Colorado received $3 million in planning funds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund under the US EPA to update our statewide climate reduction plan, which is our Greenhouse Gas Roadmap. And what's really interesting about that process is in revisiting the last 3 to 5 years of progress on our emissions reduction as a state, we're really asking ourselves to look at what the next 3 to 5 years look like and identify all of the near-term priority actions and projects that we would want the state to accomplish to achieve that next 3 to 5 years of emissions reductions. The implication of that is beginning of next year, the federal government, specifically the EPA, is going to make almost $5 billion, $4.8 billion available for local governments to go after competitively to do any of those kind of qualifying activities. So the real implication of the update to the Greenhouse Gas Roadmap, besides all the outreach we'll be doing around the state, engaging with our local governments to identify the types of projects that have been successful, what hasn't been successful, where should the state be focusing our priorities and our money, but also that those priorities that we identify through that planning process will have a lot of follow-up money available to support projects and support implementation after the fact. So beginning next year, Colorado is well positioned to be competitive for their chunk of that $4.8 billion. And the reason I say that is besides a couple of states that are far ahead of the curve like California, Colorado is one of the only states that actually has a statewide greenhouse gas inventory and a statewide climate emissions reduction plan. A lot of other states are just starting that process. So when it comes to next April, for our local governments and our state to be competitive for federal funds, we are so much further ahead of the curve because we've already identified where we are and where we need to go.
Right, that's great, thank you. And Paul, let me ask you, and this from a broader perspective, because we're talking about infrastructure and that's sort of what you do. You know, from your perspective, how does transmission development fit in with a sustainable energy future, and what are the drivers for increased transmission development? And particularly, I think you're going to have some insight into this. Look, we live in the West. Most of the West is owned by the federal government, and then you've got tribal lands on top of that. How can this be done, particularly for the transmission build-out that's going to be necessary for moving renewables, frankly, out of the West to other parts of the country? How can, in your experience, how can this be done? What's that going to look like?
No, it's a great question, Doug, and something that Eric was talking about was IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the things that really came out of that was of all the impacts we're going to see on the clean energy side, getting that amount of clean energy onto the grid is going to be a huge challenge. And we're going to lose a lot of the benefits that are coming from that legislation without increased access to the grid. So the idea then, of course, is then, well, we need to kind of be proactively increasing our infrastructure in order to meet that increased demand for clean energy. But it's not just the renewables coming on. It's electrification, it's congestion, it's the desire to have a stronger, more resilient grid by being able to move that power from different regions, more diversification in weather, more strengthening the ties between our different electrical regions. So it's all these things that are coming together to really just require a massive amount of build out and have to do it much quicker than what we've done over the last 10 to 20 years. So you kind of have this scale problem where you need to do a lot, and you need to have this pace problem where we have to do it much more quickly and simply than what we've been doing in the last couple decades.
Eric?
Yeah, I had a quick follow-up point, and then I actually had a question for Paul. So my follow-up point is, so many of the projects the state wants people to do to decarbonize rely on transmission infrastructure to be successful. And we actually launched our own state program, the Microgrids for Community Resiliency Program through DOLA, which provides money for local governments to do transmission infrastructure projects with their utility partners to support all of the other types of projects. So as an example, we're working with a rural county. They got an MCR grant, and they're going to invest in transmission capacity on their local grid to support a goal of allowing all citizens in the county of going solar on their residential rooftops if they want. My question for Paul is, just last year, Colorado created the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority. It's the first time in our state's history that we've centralized decision-making authority for transmission planning in the state. What do you think the impact of that's going to be in supporting the rest of our goals?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Looking forward to working with CETA. I think it's we're going to need all these tools essentially to just get both the pace and the scale. They have a really unique, I think, mission and charter. Although there's similar programs in New Mexico comes to mind, so there's some roadmap to follow. I think there's going to be, probably some collaboration opportunities. There's going to be projects that work specifically within the state for CETA that could go outside the state. So I think it's a great opportunity to have that sort of state level control combined with the federal presence and in opportunities where we can work together. I see it as a win-win, but we have to do it quickly too. So yes, exactly.
Thank you. It's pretty good. Adam, so when talking about the energy transition, the big stuff, the sexy stuff people talk about are like, all right, we're changing, we're going to retire a coal plant, we're going to put on a solar or wind generation to replace it, or transmission. Yes, this qualifies as sexy in this world, in case you're wondering. But what is not often talked about as much is sort of the downstream users. What are some of the most impactful policy levers we have to reduce energy use and emissions in buildings, new and existing buildings? How is the state managing that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of impact that we are feeling from buildings on the grid. I mean, when we talk about transmission, most of that is to move electrons from generation sources primarily to buildings, right? I mean, where people are using it in the end use. And so I think that we really can't understate how important reducing loads, reducing emissions from buildings are to our overall energy transition. I mean, I don't think we have a chance in making this transition successful without making sure we are concurrently making adjustments to our buildings, especially as buildings are becoming now hubs for transportation as well. As we're electrifying transportation, buildings are now where we're charging those as opposed to centralized gas stations. So I think that Colorado has really led with a number of really impactful policies that are relatively nascent right now, but are going to be really, really impactful on the emission reduction side in the coming years. I think one of those certainly is building energy codes. Colorado is a home rule state, and so codes are really challenging for us because all of that is regulated and enforced at the local level. But the state has really set out to essentially up statewide minimums, set a floor for local governments that are adopting these codes, and continually be raising that floor and essentially raising the standard that our new buildings are continually being built to, from a very energy efficient perspective all the way up to moving towards solar on rooftops, electrification, transportation electrification, in much higher increased levels of efficiency. And so that is really, really designed to help us make sure that we are not continually adding inefficient and high energy using, high emitting buildings to our system. But that still leaves us with a number of existing buildings that we have to worry about decarbonizing too. So building performance standards is another pathway that we are pursuing in the state to really try to drive down emissions and energy use in what currently are largest commercial buildings, but future opportunities either at the local level or at the state level can be really used to drive down emissions and energy use through a combination of regulatory, emission and energy use standards and thresholds, but also, concurring utilization of incentives and other voluntary opportunities that will help building owners and homeowners and renters all be able to really drive down energy use and emissions. And then I think we also are working very closely with utilities on regulating emissions from gas use in buildings. So there's clean heat plans that are currently underway and being developed to really regulate natural gas emissions from natural gas distribution systems. And so there's kind of a holistic approach really to tackling emissions and energy use across the entire building stock in Colorado, and looking at buildings holistically and not just focusing on HVAC as being one solution, and looking at the building ecosystem and building envelopes as like they are an entire functional ecosystem, and we have to treat them kind of holistically and can't just piecemeal our way through solutions.
All right. Thank you.
I might just add one
Yes,
thing
please.
real quick as sort of a parallel that I see to the building space, the energy efficiency space. We also have to think about transmission in the same way in terms of being as most efficient with the system that we have now, and how can we use the existing right-of-ways that are already disturbed? Is there technology we can use to upgrade those rather than building new greenfield sites? Can we use new technology, more precise technology, to put more electrons on the lines that we already have now much more quickly, more efficiently, rather than just completely overbuilding our requirements? And we're seeing that at the federal level get a lot of political attention, including our own senator here in Colorado.
Right. Yes, thank you. Agnieszka, I was going to get to you, but please, you go.
I would like to add to the point of needs for holistic approach and transmission requirements. So one of the challenges that we have at Colorado Springs Utilities is the type of resources that we are considering in our portfolio. They are vastly solar and wind, and unfortunately, they do not necessarily provide reliable power when the power is needed. So that leads ultimately to that overbuilding issue that it was just mentioned, and innovative solutions that would minimize the needs of then further expanding with transmission capacity network would be perfect, because our plan right now, 1,500 megawatt hours of new resources, is primarily driven by the fact that we don't get capacity from these renewable resources. So we do need to account for more in order to meet our needs. So thank you for that point.
Yeah, and don't hand over the microphone yet. I was just going to ask you a question, and maybe you've just already answered it, but you, like I said, you're at the sort of nice edge of implementing all of this. So these guys get to come up with the great ideas, and then they filter down to you, and it's like, okay, our job's done. You take over now. And I know Colorado Springs Utilities has a sustainability plan. Are what you just outlined the challenges you face? Are there greater challenges than that as well? What's the tripping point that you think about, you're thinking about at night, and when you wake up at 2 a.m. you say, gosh, this really worries me?
We sleep, eat, and live at the challenges. No, I'm just kidding. We definitely will need the money that is coming. We'll definitely need transmission that is in works. But just to answer this question tailored to Colorado Springs Utilities situation, I meant there is a lot of challenges. I would go by the most important ones. So I will start from the nice one to have, which is the growth I mentioned earlier. We do attract residential as well as industrial customer types. So it is a challenge to grow network and build sufficient capacity to accommodate not only regulatory requirements, but also account for that growth that is coming. And to make this right in the right time, it is a challenge. And just to tie into some other comments and feedback, when we are looking at our customer load shape, this is such a dynamic phenomenon right now. It was mentioned, electrification was mentioned, so that is a change to our load pattern. We're talking distributed solar, EV adoption. Those are such a big factors of our load on top of our just variation within the segment. So doing scenario analysis is a fun job to have. You gotta love these numbers and multiple scenario analysis, because that's what we essentially do. But those are main challenges on the demand side. Now, when it comes to the supply side, the few I would mention and would want to highlight is number one, probably immaturity of certain renewable technologies. So we are living in this very interesting times where energy is evolving. There is a lot of innovation, but to live in a utility space and build those plans and look at them 20 years perspective, it is a challenge to assume which one will flourish, which one will not. Definitely excited about hydrogen and things coming along the way, but for now, we're focusing on the mature technologies. And I think I diluted a little bit to renewables, the ones that we are considering. Of course, our all resource portfolio would show what it's out there. So we just looking at it right now from the planning standpoint. But solar and wind, because we are overbuilding, there is a challenge in integrating those renewables in our portfolio. They are producing when we don't want to, and when we need them, they are not there. So what we do, we are looking into joining RTO market in 2026, trying to alleviate or minimize the impact. We are also looking at our customer now from the perspective of being a resource to us. So it was mentioned before, we're not only looking at customer as a load, but now we're looking at customer as part of our solution for those that are flexible as far as demand response. We want to work with our customer base, create attractive programs where they are willing to help us use their battery, cycle their thermostats, so that way we don't have to overbuild and buy new resources as much as we would without their help. So that's been a challenge, but much more. But I think I will stop here. Thank you.
That's really interesting. You touched upon a whole bunch of things, and we don't have time for me to follow up. But RTO development, I think is going to be like really crucial if this is going to get done. And you're right, the demand is going to increase on you guys. The anticipated, the plan is that for 1 million new EVs by 2030, and that's going to be on you guys to fuel them. And there's a whole bunch of things that are happening out there that I should be stressing you out. I'm just going to say it. Let's do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add one quick thing too. I mean, I think that really goes back to thinking about all of these things in a really holistic manner, because I think we really need to make sure that we are not just driving towards emissions reductions alone, because we could electrify everything without efficiency. We could electrify vehicles. We could electrify homes and buildings without efficiency, and we would have, build out renewables on the grid, and we would have zero emissions. But we're not going to have a reliable grid. We're not going to have a sustainable power system. We're going to significantly overbuild our resources for what is needed. And so I think, making sure we're pairing that efficiency and that realism with the emissions reductions and the energy use, I think is a really key. point.
Okay, we have 20 seconds left, and I'm loath to leave any time on the clock, so we're doing a lightning round. In one word, describe your view of the energy transition in Colorado, respectively, or in the nation. You go.
One word.
One word. Describe your feeling.
Compared to every other place I've worked in the
You're using
country,
up to 20
very
seconds. Oh,
collaborative.
so you lose the 20.
Very collaborative.
Leadership.
Opportunity.
Innovation.
I will just double down integration of different aspects.
Okay, we're done. Thanks, you all. Thanks, guys, for tuning in.